Move on now to our next item of business, which is a statement from the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, on COVID-19. The First Minister will take questions at the end of her statement. I would encourage all members who wish to ask a question to press their request to speak buttons, and I call on Nicola Sturgeon.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. I'll start with a brief summary of the COVID statistics that were published just a short time ago. The total number of positive cases reported yesterday was 771. That is 8.6% of the tests carried out yesterday and takes the total number of cases to 90,081. 1,197 people are in hospital, a decrease of 11 from yesterday. 84 people are in intensive care. That's the same as yesterday. And I regret to report that in the past 24 hours, a further 41 deaths were registered of patients who first tested positive over the previous 28 days. The total number of deaths under that measurement is now 3,544. Of course, those figures remind us of the grief that this virus has and continues to cause. And again, I want to send my condolences to all those who have lost a loved one. Presiding Officer, turning now to the allocation of levels, with the exception of East Lothian, which this morning moved from level 3 to level 2, I can confirm that the Scottish Government is not proposing any changes today to the levels that currently apply to each local authority area. The latest data shows that across the whole country and within most local authority areas, the restrictions in place are having an impact. The number of new cases across the country has stabilised in recent weeks. I've reported that over the past few weeks, but we now have grounds for cautious optimism that numbers may be declining. There is also evidence that admissions to hospital and ICU are declining now too, though it is important to note that these figures tend to fluctuate on a day-to-day basis. Independent estimates also place the R number between 0.8 and 1. That again is indicative of infections now declining. However, as I set out to Parliament last week, the national picture, which is positive, masks some regional variations. That is why we took action last week to put 11 local authority areas into the toughest restrictions to try to ensure that case numbers in those parts of central and western Scotland would fall more markedly. At the time, I indicated that these restrictions would remain in place for 3 weeks until December the 11th, and therefore there are no changes for those local authorities proposed this week. That means that the City of Glasgow, Renfrewshire, East Dunbartonshire, West Dunbartonshire, North Lanarkshire, South Lanarkshire, East Ayrshire, South Ayrshire, Stirling and West Lothian will all remain in level 4. People living in these areas should stay at home as much as possible until 11th December and should not travel outside their own local authority area unless for an essential purpose. We have also adopted a cautious approach to the levels in the rest of Scotland this week. Orkney, Shetland, the Western Isles, Moray and the Highlands will remain in level 1. All of these areas continue to have low levels of infection. Aberdeen City, Aberdeenshire, the Borders, Dumfries and Galloway and Argyll and Bute will remain at level 2 for now. In both Dumfries and Galloway and Argyll and Bute, the prevalence of the virus continues to fall or to stabilise at low levels. If this progress is maintained, we will take a view in the coming weeks as to whether they should move to level 1, and we are hopeful that that will be possible. There have been recent rises in case numbers in both Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen City, but we have been able to attribute these in large part to specific outbreaks which are being managed by local public health teams, and so our judgment at this point is that these do not require a change in levels, although we continue to monitor them carefully. In addition, the City of Edinburgh, Clackmannanshire, Falkirk, Inverclyde, North Ayrshire, Dundee, Fife, Perth and Kinross and Angus will remain at level 3 for now. Of these, I should advise Parliament that we are monitoring Clackmannanshire and Perth and Kinross particularly carefully, given recent increases in cases in these areas. The two local authorities I want to say a little bit more about are Mid Lothian and East Lothian. I indicated last week that both those areas would move from level 3 to level 2 unless data suggested that the epidemic in those areas was becoming worse. At least East Lothian, as I've already indicated, I'm pleased to say that case numbers have continued to decline. East Lothian therefore moved from level 3 to level 2 at 6 AM today. But in recent days, we have seen an increase in case numbers in Mid Lothian from 61 new cases per 100,000 to just over 97. Now, it's important to say that this is still well below the national average, but a 50% increase in 1 week is obviously a source of concern. Test positivity has also increased to 5.7%. As a precaution, therefore, we have decided that Midlothian should not move down a level right now, but instead should stay in level 3 for a further period. I realise this will be disappointing for individuals, but also for businesses which will have made preparations for reopening or for extending their hours of opening. But we do believe that adopting a cautious approach is preferable to a situation where Midlothian moves to level 2 now, while cases are rising, only to face a move back again almost immediately if they were to continue to rise. Discretionary funding was made available last week to local authorities, and any business in Midlothian that needs to should approach the council to find out what support is available to them. That concludes our assessment of the levels for each local authority for this week. However, our approach to managing this virus is, of course, not simply about applying different levels of restriction. It also involves measures to improve compliance, expand testing, and, as soon as possible, distribute and administer vaccines. Last week, the Health Secretary updated Parliament on our plans for a population-wide vaccination programme. And yesterday we heard more good news from the Oxford University AstraZeneca clinical trials. Now I want to take the opportunity today to congratulate the team there for the quite exceptional progress that has been made. There is no doubt that the light at the end of the tunnel that we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks is getting brighter. For now, though, we must continue to do all we can to keep the virus at bay as we navigate our way through what will be a tough winter. As part of that, the Health Secretary will set out to Parliament tomorrow our plans to extend asymptomatic testing. I can confirm that we are now working with the 11 councils and 5 health boards in level 4 to develop and deliver targeted geographical testing in a number of communities. The Health Secretary will also give an update tomorrow on our plans to extend testing to designated visitors to care homes, to care at home workers and to further groups of NHS staff. And she will give an update on the ongoing preparations to start testing students through the use of lateral flow devices to support their return home for Christmas. All students who wish to return home for Christmas will be offered 2 COVID tests a few days apart, and I can confirm that the student testing programme will get underway next week. I would strongly recommend that any student who is due to return home over the holiday period gets tested first. In addition, students should take extra care in the 2 weeks before travel, for example by reducing social contact and going out only for essential reasons. By taking extra care and getting tested before travel, students can help to make the Christmas period as safe as possible for themselves and their families. And that issue of ensuring that Christmas is safe is the final point I want to touch on today. The Christmas period, as the Chamber has just been hearing from the Deputy First Minister, is the subject of ongoing discussions among the 4 UK nations. I will take part in a COBRA meeting later today where it is hoped that we will agree a common framework, albeit that some details, for example on the precise definition of household, might differ to reflect the different circumstances in each nation. I know everyone has a desire to see loved ones over the festive period. However, there is also a very real and a very legitimate anxiety that doing so could put those we love at risk, set back our progress as a country and result in unnecessary deaths and suffering. That would always be a worry, but it is perhaps especially acute when we also know that we might be within weeks of being able to vaccinate a significant proportion of the population. So the arrangements that we put in place for the festive period will seek to balance those concerns. Any easing of restrictions will be temporary, it will be limited, and it will be accompanied by advice on the precautions that we should all take to minimise risk. And we will continue to ask people to err on the side of caution. Our overall advice will be for people to use any flexibility carefully and only if they believe it right and necessary for their personal circumstances. That advice will recognise that all of us now have an even greater incentive and motivation to make the months ahead as safe as possible. As I indicated earlier, we have all been heartened in recent days by the increasingly positive news about vaccine development. There is now a very distinct possibility that the first vaccines could be administered before Christmas and that by the spring of next year we will have vaccinated our way back to something much closer to normal life. But although an end to the pandemic may now be in sight, we haven't reached that end point yet. The winter period ahead will be difficult. At the moment, COVID is still widespread, it is still highly infectious, and it is still causing heartbreak to families each and every day. So while it is hard, we must continue to do what is necessary to keep ourselves and our loved ones safe. So please continue to stick to the rules. Do not meet in each other's homes. If you do meet outdoors or in public indoor places, please stick to the limit of 6 people from 2 households. Abide by the travel restrictions that are now in law. If you live in a level 3 or 4 area, do not leave your local authority area unless for an essential purpose. And if you live elsewhere, do not travel into a level 3 or level 4 area. And remember facts, the 5 rules which will help keep all of us safe in our day-to-day lives. Wear face coverings, avoid crowded places, clean hands and hand surfaces, keep 2 metres distance from anybody in other households, and self-isolate and book a test if you have symptoms. By sticking to all of these difficult rules now, we can protect ourselves, our loved ones and our communities. We will also help protect our NHS over the winter, and we can all look forward to the better days that do lie ahead. So please stick with it.
Thank you very much, First Minister. First Minister will now take questions. Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister has talked about the vaccine programme starting this side of Christmas, and it's that I wish to ask about today. In her statement last week to Parliament, the Cabinet Secretary for Health outlined plans to vaccinate around 1 million people by the end of January, with that initial phase beginning as soon as supplies of the vaccine purchased by the UK Government become available and are distributed across the 4 home nations. And in that statement, the Cabinet Secretary also outlined the expected process for vaccine delivery in Scotland, which included a number of elements, including the setting up of vaccination centres, of mobile delivery units, using some of the existing flu infrastructure and GP surgeries. Now, clearly, we all want every phase of vaccination to be delivered as quickly and smoothly as possible to those target groups who need it most, no matter where they live. But it is also clear that this is an enormous logistical exercise that will depend in large part on the ability of central government and health boards to equip, resource and staff facilities such as GP practices who are already under huge strain as a result of the normal winter pressures and the extra pressure of treating COVID patients. So can I ask the First Minister if she is satisfied that every health board is in a suitably enhanced state of readiness, and what contingency plans are being put in place for those parts of the health service most at risk from competing pressures? Additionally, the Cabinet Secretary has stated that we will need over 2,000 vaccinators and support staff by the end of January. What was not made clear was how many of the 2,000 will come from existing healthcare workers removed from other duties, and how many need to be recruited from outside of the current NHS. Can the First Minister also give us clarity on that point and any further information regarding progress on recruitment?
First Minister.
Firstly, it is right to say that this vaccination programme will be perhaps the biggest logistical exercise and challenge that has been undertaken. While it is absolutely right and proper that Parliament, not just now, but as we go through that vaccination programme, scrutinise delivery and progress and the effectiveness of it, I want to give an assurance to Parliament right now that neither I nor the Health Secretary need to be reminded of how big a challenge and responsibility it is to get this right. The Health Secretary set out a number of details last week. She also very candidly said that we will require to update Parliament further as these details develop. There are 2 significant unknowns that are less unknown than they were just a few weeks ago, but still have a degree of uncertainty around them. Firstly, that is the final licensing and certification as safe of these vaccines and the quantities of supply and at what pace they will be delivered to us. The UK Government is procuring on behalf of all 4 nations, but while we have indications of the supply of each vaccine, we do not yet have certainty about that. The second unknown, which, as I say, is less unknown than it was because the JCVI, which is the body that advises on clinical prioritisation, has put some initial recommendations forward. They may change. but that gives us an early sense of the priority. And in the first phase of priority, of course, we will see those in care homes, those working in care homes, residents in care homes, people over 80 and frontline health workers. And we want to get that programme up and running and that first phase completed as quickly as possible. But let me be very clear that we want to vaccinate the entire adult population as quickly as it is feasible to do. So we will continue to make more details available as and when we can. The other uncertainty around this, and it is one of the reasons the news yesterday on the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is so good, is that all of these vaccines have their own requirements in terms of storage, temperatures that they have to be stored at, and logistics in terms of transportation. AstraZeneca one appears to be more straightforward than some of the other ones, which is why that is good news. In terms of the vaccinators, we will continue to update on the recruitment of that. Obviously, we have right now the ongoing flu vaccination programme, which is well underway, and more than half or around half of that programme is already done, and that will complete in the weeks to come, and those working in that will then shift over to the COVID vaccination programme. There will be a mixture of people who are taken and redeployed from other roles and recruited in a new capacity. We have also got the assistance, should we need it, of the military, which will be very welcome. And we also have an agreement with local authority leaders that local authorities will make their resources available as required. So we will continue on a regular basis to update Parliament, but I want to give an assurance. There was a direct question, am I satisfied that every health board is in the position they need to be? At this point, yes, but this will not be a fixed judgment in a moment of time. We will continue to monitor that, to work with health boards to make sure as some of these uncertainties become clearer, then all parts of the system are doing what they need to do to ensure the successful delivery of this vaccination programme.
Thank you. Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Like too many businesses across the country, businesses in Midlothian are on their knees. We all accept that this situation can be fast-moving and the evidence can move in the wrong direction. But decisions like this one today need to be a genuine co-production involving the locally elected council, the local business community, workers and their trade unions. And in Midlothian, they'd been told for the last week that they would move to level 2, including as recently as last Friday. It was only at 10:45 yesterday morning they were told that they may not. And only at 16:29 they were told by the Deputy First Minister that they definitely were not moving to level 2. And that means, as a result, stock ordered by businesses will go to waste, investment in health and safety measures will lie idle, and staff rehired will once again be laid off. And for some business owners, enough is enough. They are throwing in the towel, they are closing down for good and making staff redundant. They simply wanted certainty, and they didn't get it. So in these extraordinary circumstances, like those facing the economy and the people of Midlothian, will the First Minister provide additional funding over and beyond the £30 million announced last week, which was to cover the whole of Scotland? Will it act to compensate and support these businesses and these working people caught out by this 11th hour decision?
First Minister.
I'll come on to funding specifically in a second. I know how difficult this is, and I know how difficult the general situation is for individuals, for businesses, for everybody right now, and I will never seek to sugarcoat this. This is a torrid period for all of us to be living through. And I recognise that part of the difficulty, a big part of the difficulty, is the uncertainty that is inherent in dealing with the nature of what we're dealing with. This is a virus. Unfortunately, it doesn't behave in the way that we all want it to behave at all times. And therefore, in order to protect the population, to try to limit the health impact and limit the number of people who die from this, we have to be prepared to be flexible. That's why when I stood here precisely this time last week, I was very clear that the decision to allow East Lothian and Midlothian to move from level 3 to level 2 was contingent on there not being a deterioration in the data. We have been monitoring that over the course of the week. Of course, figures are published by Public Health Scotland on a daily basis. And the deterioration in the position in Midlothian was such that the National Incident Management Team discussed this and discussed it as recently as yesterday morning, and came to a recommendation that it would not be sensible, given that rise in cases, to take Midlothian down a level. There were discussions with the Council and the Deputy First Minister. When we have these discussions, we invite councils to put a different point of view, because these decisions are always finely balanced. But I think the overall view was that it would not make sense to have Midlothian, while cases were rising, going down a level, and for that situation, if it should continue, to see the local authority immediately go back up in a week. So this is not ideal, but it is perhaps greater stability than the alternative would have been. And I cannot stand here and on any week and guarantee that there will be no changes to our planning, because if we are not prepared to stay flexible, then this virus will too quickly get the better of us. The reason we announced last week a £30 million discretionary fund for local authorities was to give local authorities more ability to act flexibly, both in terms of decisions that we had taken last week, but also unforeseen developments that might happen. So Midlothian will have a share of that £30 million, and they will from that be able to look at whether any particular business that had planned to reopen today has had losses because of that. And that's why in my opening remarks I encouraged businesses in Midlothian to contact the Council to explore what support is available to them. This is a difficult, uncertain, unpredictable situation. I know that makes it difficult for everybody, but we have to continue to take decisions based on what is best to protect the country if we're to get through these next few months, hopefully these final few months, as safely as we possibly can.
Alison Johnson, who joins us remotely.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister confirmed in her statement that 8.6% of recent tests have proved positive, which is above the World Health Organization threshold of 5%, where they state that the virus is out of control. So we all very much understand that any loosening of restrictions over Christmas is a trade-off. So will the First Minister ensure that the Scottish Government publish the evidence base behind the arrangements? And can she ensure that this includes modelling of the impact they will have on the number of new infections over the Christmas period? You know, for example, what level of increase in infection will be considered acceptable? Thank you.
First Minister.
Look, we will continue to publish evidence and modelling as we think that is helpful and appropriate. There is, on this though, I think a really important point about being candid with people. And this I recognise, and I think across the UK we all recognise this will be a really difficult but really important thing to communicate. What we are seeking to do is give people the option, should their personal circumstances require it, of a bit of flexibility over Christmas. But whether that is providing a window of time or some flexibility in the number of households that can come together, what we are not saying is that we are absolutely encouraging everybody to go out and use that to the maximum. This is about people continuing to make judgments. If I would say very openly to anybody who thinks they can get through the Christmas period without mixing more than we're advising right now, to do that. This is intended to recognise that, particularly at Christmas, for some people, social isolation, relatives being on their own and distant is much more difficult. But this is not, just because we are saying something might be permissible, is not the same as an encouragement to use that flexibility to the maximum. And that is going to be a difficult thing to recognise. And if we are all very careful in this, then we can minimise any impact of that. The Scottish Government is, of course, as other governments will be doing as well, considering what the implications for that might be in terms of the advice we might give people who have been seeing other people, what they might do before that, during that and after that, and what the advice and the precautions we might recommend might be in the post-festive period. And we will, while hopefully come to an overall agreement with other UK nations today, we will continue to develop the guidance around this in the days that follow.
And Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The balanced and proportionate enforcement of travel restrictions by Police Scotland is vital to ensuring compliance with them. That duty is theirs and theirs alone. But the First Minister will have seen the disgraceful tweet from Ian Blackford to his 100,000 followers last night, singling out and bullying a private citizen who had relocated here from England. Does she support vigilante action for her MPs like this? And what steps has she taken to address Mr Blackford's behaviour? But beyond that, what consideration has her government given to mass testing of those living in level 4 so that travel restrictions may be finally relaxed?
First Minister.
On the first point, you know, I suspect people watching have a myriad of things that they want to hear addressed in this Parliament and hopefully will do during the course of this session. I'm not sure that would have been at the top of the list, but I also saw Ian Blackford apologise for doing something that he recognised he shouldn't have done on Twitter. And I think that's the right thing when people get something wrong, is to readily apologise for it. And I think that's the grace and dignity that I associate with Ian Blackford every single day of the week. On the issue of travel restrictions, the travel restrictions are in law for a good reason right now. We must, if we are to maintain a proportionate, targeted approach across the country, we must not take the virus from high to low prevalence areas, or have people from low prevalence areas perhaps travelling to higher prevalence areas and taking the virus back with them. That necessitates travel restrictions. The early indication I have from the weekend is that, as I would have expected, people have responded magnificently. You know, we have information that suggests in level 4 areas, road traffic reduced by more than 30% compared to the previous Sunday. In level 3 areas, it was down by more than 10%, and that reduction is the case across different modes of transport, and that would recognise people doing the right thing for reasons that they understand to be the right reasons. Obviously, we keep the regulatory basis of travel restrictions under review as we move parts of the country in and out of levels, and we will not keep these restrictions in place for any longer than is absolutely necessary. But I want to be very clear, we deem them to be absolutely necessary at this stage.
Thank you. I see we have about 17 members who wish to ask a supplementary question, or just a question, I should say. This session won't run any later than 3:05 at the latest. Bruce Crawford, so keep your questions and answers concise, please. Bruce Crawford, to be followed by Maurice Golden. Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, President Officer. I'm sure First Minister, you'll understand there was considerable disappointment the Stirling area was placed in Tier 4 restrictions last week. However, given the 7-day positivity rate per 100,000 rose from 214 on the day of the decision to 224 on Sunday past, I believe the decision was absolutely correct in order to save lives. First Minister, will you join with me in sincerely thanking the staff of NHS Forth Valley, Stirling Council and the Scottish Ambulance Service for carrying out mass community testing in areas such as Bannockburn, Fallen, Cowie and Plean in my Stirling constituency. This all in an effort to identify people in the community with the COVID-19 virus, including those who are asymptomatic, and to save as many lives as possible and protect the NHS.
First Minister.
Yeah, I will join with Bruce Crawford very readily in thanking all those working in the NHS, the ambulance service and in frontline roles more generally to try to do a number of things to keep the population safe. The decision to place any part of the country into level 4 was not taken lightly last week, and I think Bruce Crawford has demonstrated through the figures why that was an important decision and the right decision to take in respect of Stirling. We hope that these restrictions will, over the next couple of weeks, start to see case numbers and test positivity fall. As I said earlier on, and it's relevant to Bruce Crawford's question, the Health Secretary will set out tomorrow more detail of the work that we have been undertaking with the 11 local authorities and the 5 health boards concerned across these level 4 areas about targeted geographic mass testing, which will be a mixture of PCR and lateral flow testing, and will therefore by definition include people who are asymptomatic. This is a part of the overall approach we need to take, in addition to the restrictions we're asking people to abide by, to get these infection levels down, and I'm sure the Chamber will be interested in the detail of that when the Health Secretary sets it out tomorrow.
Maurice Golden, be followed by George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Many hard-pressed businesses are still waiting to receive support a week after restrictions were announced. All the more frustrating given the 11 days wait the last time. Will the First Minister agree to publishing regular data on the grants businesses have received?
Yes, I'm sure, as we did previously, we will make that information available. It's important that that is available. The money is made available through and administered by local authorities, and these grants are open for application, and were open for application last week. There is significant financial support available for businesses. I don't pretend that it will compensate every business for every loss that they're making. I know that this is a much more severe situation than that, which is why it's so important to get the levels of the virus down so that we can start allowing businesses to trade more normally again. We have sought to not just match the business support that has been available in the rest of the UK or made available by the UK government, but we have in a number of different ways exceeded that. The discretionary funding I set out last week exceeds the relevant and comparable schemes in England, as I understand it. We have also, and I was seeing some commentary, I think that came from a select committee in the UK Parliament over the last few days about steps that we had taken in Scotland to make support available for newly self-employed people, which is not available in some other parts of the UK. So we will continue to make sure that the support to the maximum we can provide it is available, and that that support is accessible for businesses as quickly and as effectively as possible.
George Adams, followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Tomorrow marks the annual International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. One thing that the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted to us all is the importance of protecting women and girls who find themselves isolated and vulnerable due to the actions of an abusive partner. Can I ask the First Minister to outline some of the ways in which the Scottish Government will continue to tackle domestic abuse?
First Minister.
It has been a major concern, I think, to all of us during the pandemic that people may have been subject to domestic abuse, and people who had been subject to domestic abuse become more susceptible to that, and that for some we were asking people to stay at home when home for them was not a place of safety. So we've seen it as a priority during the crisis to highlight the frontline services that were there to help people. We allocated additional resourcing to some of those services so that they could respond to an increase in demand from victims of abuse. And for anyone experiencing domestic abuse, it's important that they know that help is available, that the services are there, and that, of course, Police Scotland are there for them too. Today we will publish the final report for Equally Safe, which is the joint strategy with COSLA to prevent and eradicate violence against women and girls. That details the response to COVID and outlines key actions to date, and I think shows that we have continued to make progress to tackle domestic abuse and overcome the challenges of the last year, many of which have, of course, been heightened by the challenges of the pandemic.
Jackie Bailey, to be followed by Emma Harper.
Let me start by welcoming the extension of testing to care-at-home workers and family caregivers and the additional testing capacity to 65,000 tests per day by the end of the year. I understand that yesterday some 13,000 tests were carried out, just over a third of the available capacity. Given that the announcement to extend testing to care-at-home workers and family caregivers was made a month ago on the 23rd of October, why is testing not yet happening in my area, which is in a level 4 lockdown due to the prevalence of COVID?
First Minister.
Well, there's a few issues in there that I think it's important to disentangle. The 65,000 capacity, which we are on track to meet, I hope exceed actually by the end of this year, is for PCR testing. The main PCR programme, which of course we report testing numbers on every day, is in large part demand driven. There are exceptions to that. The care home weekly testing, for example, but in large part the PCR programme is demand driven, so at times when prevalence of the virus is falling, we will also see demand for testing falling. In terms of the extension, frustrates me sometimes as much as I know it frustrates other people. It does take time to put substantial programmes of testing delivery into practice, and that's why the Health Secretary will update on that tomorrow, so that very soon we will see care at home workers and designated visitors to care home testing. But the bit to disentangle is how we will increasingly use lateral flow testing, which is different and has a different processing requirement to PCR testing. The availability of that allows us to quite substantially extend the reach of mass testing, particularly to asymptomatic groups. One of the constraints on that right now is, and we hope this will change soon, is that it is not yet licensed for unsupervised use. So we can't simply give tests to groups of people and ask them to do them themselves, although in time that will become possible. So there are a number of interrelated and different technological issues at play here with testing, but as the Health Secretary will demonstrate tomorrow, we are making continued good progress in expanding the reach of testing and seeing testing as part of the variety of tools we have to try to combat the virus until such times as we're able to vaccinate against it.
Emma Harper, to be followed by Donald Cameron.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Deputy First Minister has just responded to a topical question similar to this, but I'd like to ask the First Minister how the Scottish Government will continue to support people in rural communities, including Dumfries and Galloway, to ensure that they are not suffering from loneliness and social isolation over the Christmas season due to the restrictions caused by COVID-19.
Well, the Deputy First Minister has just addressed this in a topical question. Obviously, one of the reasons for seeking to come to an agreement with other UK nations for some flexibility over the Christmas period is to recognise the fact that social isolation and loneliness can be exacerbated over Christmas. Although I think it's really important that we also recognise that it is not just an issue for people who are on their own at Christmas. It is an issue all year round. But that is one of the key things that we are doing to try to deal with that over the coming period. We also have a number of initiatives that we support from mental health initiatives like the Clear Your Head campaign. Our Supporting Communities Fund has also supported a range of national and local organisations to help people directly impacted by COVID, and that will include people who are suffering from loneliness and social isolation. I mentioned some organisations last week that we have supported and who do very good work, Generations Working Together, the Scottish Pensioners Forum, Outside the Box, Hourglass, Age Scotland, to name just a few. The additional funding that we have made available helps them increase the work they do to provide support, advice and friendship for people. Initial figures for the first phase of our Connecting Scotland digital programme to get people online and connected also have shown that over 40% of people who have benefited from that are over 60. So we will continue to act in a range of ways to try to mitigate the impact of loneliness, not just at Christmas, but perhaps particularly over these next few weeks.
Donald Cameron, followed by Anne Williams.
Thank you. The figures for suicides in Scotland in 2019 were released today, showing that the number of suicides has risen to its highest figure for almost a decade. Given these deeply concerning statistics from last year, combined with the impact of COVID-19 on people's mental health this year, can the First Minister today commit to publishing more up-to-date figures on suicide? And can she detail what specific action her government is taking in relation to suicide prevention during the pandemic?
First Minister.
The figures today are obviously of extreme concern and very distressing figures, not least because they do predate the pandemic, and we know the additional impact that there has been on people's mental health over the course of the pandemic. So that obviously gives us cause for concern. Figures are published regularly, annually, is annually on suicides, but yes, we will consider whether there is anything we can do consistent with the publication of robust and reliable statistics to publish statistics, particularly for the pandemic period, more regularly or frequently. I can't give a commitment to that today, but I'm happy to ask for that to be considered. The Mental Health Minister has already set out some detail of the work that we are doing through the Mental Health Transition programme to recover mental health services and to look at the additional work that needs to be done to respond particularly to the pandemic. That will include suicide prevention work, but I know the Mental Health Minister will want to respond in full to today's statistics and to set out in more detail the work that we will be doing over the coming period as we seek to recover in so many different ways from what COVID has thrown at us.
Annabel Ewing, to be followed by Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister referred a while back to the excellent compliance that there has been with the Level 3 and Level 4 travel restrictions thus far. But with a view to ensuring that this remains the case, can I ask the First Minister to underscore for my constituents in Cowdenbeath and people across Fife and indeed across the whole of Scotland the reason for such restrictions, what they are designed to do, and the vital importance of folk adhering to these restrictions, particularly in the run-up to Christmas. Thank you.
First Minister.
I think it is important to take every opportunity, given how restrictive these rules are on people's day-to-day lives, to explain and underline the reasons for them. We are seeking, as people know, to avoid the whole country being in level 4 and therefore the whole country having the same level of restrictions, because the spread of the virus in each part of the country does not necessitate that from a purely epidemiological public health perspective. But if we are to maintain a targeted approach whereby we have higher levels of restriction in areas where the virus is at higher levels but lower levels of restriction where prevalence is not as great, then we must avoid the virus spreading from area to area. So it's really important that if you live in one of the areas in level 4, level 3, where prevalence is higher, you do not travel outside of these areas, because what you then do is risk taking the virus to other areas and then perhaps making it more likely that they will have to have tougher restrictions in the weeks to come. And if you live in an area where the levels of the virus are lower, don't go to higher level areas, because you may get the virus there and take it back, and that same problem with spread will happen. So travel restrictions are essential if we are to maintain a targeted approach. That is true in an international sense, and it is true domestically as well when we face an infectious virus. As I indicated earlier on, the figures we have for travel across all modes of transport over the weekend were that people are complying with these restrictions, a significant reduction in the use of roads and buses and trains over the weekend, in and out, particularly of level 4 and level 3 areas. We have also looked at these figures are perhaps not quite as robust as the way Transport Scotland monitors travel, but we've looked at shopping centres in level 3 areas adjacent to level 4 areas to try to give some assurance that there is not a displacement effect. And actually, on the contrary, what we found was that it looks as if footfall in these shopping areas was down even in the level 3 areas. So we continue to monitor all of this carefully. But let me be very clear, if we are to maintain this targeted approach, it is essential that people abide by these travel restrictions.
Colin Smith to be followed by Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In areas with restrictions at level 1 and 2, people are able to travel to other parts of Scotland of a similar level of restriction, for example, to meet up with loved ones. However, if those loved ones happen to live in England, and even when lockdown is lifted south of the border in the next week, and those loved ones live in an area equivalent to our Tier 1 and 2, travel from Scotland to meet family in other parts of England will still be against the law. So can I ask the First Minister, what is the science that says my constituents in Dumfries and Galloway, the Borders, East Lothian, can travel between those boundaries to meet up with loved ones, but if their family just happens to live south of the border, it would be a criminal offence for my constituents to visit family in England, even in a similar low-tier level?
First Minister.
I'll come on to science in a second, but people have to be aware of the fact that, and I'm not going to stand here and suggest that I'm an expert on the detail of the regulations in England, but there are restrictions on travel in England as well. So aside from whether or not you would be breaching the law to travel from Scotland to England in these circumstances, you may well be breaching the current law in England, which of course is that people should remain within their own homes unless there is an essential reason to travel. So all parts of the UK, we all have slightly different restrictions in place, but there are restrictions in place on travel, I think, in all parts of the UK right now. And that brings me to the science. And, you know, this constant demand, which I understand for, give us the scientific proof. You know, when you take a step back from this, basically what we have here is an infectious virus. It spreads between people. And therefore, the way to stop it spreading between people, unfortunately, is for people to stay apart from each other and to minimise the contact they have and to minimise travel. Now, that is most important when we're dealing with high prevalence areas, which is why we put some of this into law. But difficult though this is, my advice generally to people in the midst of a global pandemic is don't travel right now unless you really need to. That is hard. It is hard to say and it's hard for people to hear. But let's just remind ourselves we are in the midst of a global pandemic of an infectious virus. And the general, I think, advice to people should be if your trip wherever you're going is not necessary right now. Really do think twice about taking it.
Stuart McMillan to be followed by Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister has said on a number of occasions that the virus won't stop just because it's Christmas, and as Mrs McShand, my constituent, said to me yesterday, you can't relax a virus. To protect our NHS in January, what steps have been taken and can we all take to mitigate any increase in the case numbers as a consequence of more people meeting over the Christmas period?
First Minister.
Well, people first and foremost should think very carefully about what they find it necessary to do over Christmas. We are going to have a situation, hopefully we'll agree it this afternoon, where there is some permissibility around gathering together that is not there right now. But that does not mean everybody has to exercise that freedom. It is there to recognise that there are some family situations where a loved one on their own, perhaps a family with a loved one that is nearing the end of their life and might not be with us next Christmas, where people will want to come together. And I think it is important to do what we can to allow that and to recognise that. But for others, if you can get through this Christmas without coming together with other households, if you would rather wait until Easter, when hopefully lots of us have been vaccinated, then I would encourage people to do that. This is one of these situations where it is very difficult for anybody in my position to legislate, and I use that word colloquially as well as literally, for every eventuality. What we are trying to do is strike a balance here that recognises the particular circumstances of family interaction over the Christmas period, but still say to people, be sensible and don't do things that you don't really have to do because there is a risk attached to everything we do. We'll also be very clear with people about the precautions they should take in the run-up to any interaction. The precautions people should take coming together. I'm not standing here suggesting that it is going to be easy for anybody on Christmas Day, if they're with family members, to remember about hand hygiene, about cleaning hard surfaces, about maybe opening the window in the depths of December to let some ventilation through. But these things will all be important. We all have to remember our individual responsibilities in the midst of this to minimise risk as much as possible. And I will do what I can over the period from now to Christmas to get that advice and those messages and that understanding across.
And Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In answer to a question I asked a few weeks ago, Presiding Officer, to the First Minister, she confirmed on behalf of her government that vitamin D will be available to anyone in the shielding category. However, the situation for supply in care homes is being considered. Can the First Minister confirm that a 4-month supply of vitamin D has now been deployed to those in the shielding category, and also confirm her government's position for the supply to care home residents?
First Minister.
The situation, if I'm getting this wrong in any way, I'll clarify it with Rachel Hamilton after this session, but I don't believe the situation has changed since the answer I gave her the last time. So I believe from my memory when she asked me this question before, we had just sent the text to people in the shielding category, making them aware that they could request a 4-month supply of vitamin D, and that is the case. So if you were in the shielding category, you should have had that text and you can get that supply. There's also advice to people, though, to be wary about any interaction with other medication. The position in care homes is that anybody in a care home where it is judged that there is a clinical need for them to have vitamin D will get that supply. But of course, there will be individual advice given, because many people in care homes will be on other medication and any interactions there have to be taken account of. That is the position that I think I narrated the last time the question was asked. I don't think it has changed. If there has been any change that I am not remembering right now, I'll make sure I advise the member of it as soon as possible.
Thank you. And I'm afraid we have to conclude our statement at that point. Apologies to the members that we weren't able to reach. And we'll move on shortly to the next item of business.